creativity is a word that brings to mind dazzling artworks, brilliant scientific insights, and innovative technologies. Yet, for all its allure, creativity defies easy definition. Researchers, philosophers, and artists alike have long grappled with the question, what does it mean to be creative, and how can we recognize creative thinking when we encounter it? In the scientific study of the mind, creativity is not simply about being different or eccentric. It is a complex capacity, deeply woven into the fabric of human experience and cognition. Looking back through history, we find that creativity was not always considered a human trait. In the time of Plato and Aristotle, and throughout the rise of Western Christianity, creativity was often attributed to external sources, particularly the divine. Inspiration was believed to descend from the gods, with the artist or thinker serving as a vessel rather than the originator of ideas. This perspective began to shift as societies became more secular, and with the gradual rise of psychology as a discipline, the focus turned inward. The question evolved, not just what creativity is, but who is creative, and how. The philosophy of creativity raises subtle and enduring questions. Is an idea creative simply because it is new, or must it also be useful or surprising? Is creativity a virtue, and what kinds of capacities, cognitive, emotional, or otherwise, must a person possess to be considered creative? Could a computer or artificial intelligence ever be truly creative? These debates, echoing from ancient times, continue to shape discussions in psychology, neuroscience, and ethics. In contemporary research, several definitions of creativity have gained prominence. Psychologists typically describe creative ideas as those that are both original and effective. In other words, creativity involves not just novelty, a departure from the familiar, but also appropriateness or usefulness. The American Psychological Association defines it as the ability to produce or develop original work, theories, techniques, or thoughts. Another widely accepted definition frames creativity as internal attention constrained by a generative goal, that is, a focused mental state aimed at producing something new within certain boundaries. Across these definitions, the themes of novelty, usefulness, and surprise recur, forming the foundational criteria by which creative acts are judged. Researchers often distinguish between two types of creativity, big C and little c. Big C creativity refers to world-changing achievements. Think of Einstein's theory of relativity or Shakespeare's plays. Little c creativity, by contrast, encompasses everyday acts of innovation, such as finding a new way to solve a household problem or crafting a clever joke. While big C creativity is rarer and often celebrated, little c creativity is recognized as a pervasive and essential part of daily life. Both forms are worthy of scientific study and, importantly, both require the ability to generate ideas that are not only novel but also appropriate to the context. Measuring creativity, however, has challenged researchers since the mid-20th century. Early efforts, particularly in the 1950s, introduced paper and pencil tests to assess creative potential. Psychologists looked for certain characteristics that seemed to cluster in creative individuals: tolerance for ambiguity, openness to new experiences, the capacity for flow, personal autonomy, verbal fluency, metaphoric thinking, persistence, intrinsic motivation, and comfort with complexity. These traits, while illuminating, offered only part of the picture. To move beyond personality traits and into observable behavior, researchers developed structured tasks. Among the most influential are the Torrance tests of creative thinking. These tests ask participants to engage in activities like generating as many uses as possible for a common object, a brick, for example, or a paperclip. This type of task, known as divergent thinking, measures qualities such as fluency, which is the number of ideas produced, flexibility, which is the variety of ideas, and originality, which is the uniqueness of ideas. The alternate uses test, a popular example, remains a staple in creativity assessment. Yet, creativity is not just about generating a multitude of ideas. The creative process also involves combining existing knowledge in new ways, recognizing novel connections, and evaluating the usefulness of solutions, a process sometimes called convergent thinking. Some researchers now argue that divergent and convergent thinking are better viewed as points on a continuum rather than as strict opposites. The interplay between these modes of thought is central to how individuals and groups approach problems, innovate, and adapt. The scope of creativity assessment extends beyond individual tasks. Psychological measurement tools have been developed to evaluate creative potential, abilities, and development in a variety of settings: clinical, educational, and organizational. These tools help standardize the process, making it possible to compare results across individuals and contexts. Nevertheless, the challenge of measuring creativity persists, due in part to the vast range of abilities and domains it encompasses. Marjorie Taylor, a prominent researcher in the field, points to four major areas of focus: the cognitive process, the product created, personal traits of the individual, and the context or press in which creativity occurs. The evolution of creativity research reflects a growing appreciation for this complexity. Early studies often focused on the end product, a painting, a scientific discovery, a technological invention. Over time, interest shifted toward understanding the underlying process, how people generate ideas, combine disparate concepts, and persist in the face of obstacles. This process-oriented view highlights the dynamic and sometimes unpredictable nature of creative thought. It also acknowledges the context in which creativity emerges, whether in a solitary studio or a bustling laboratory. With advances in neuroscience, researchers have begun to explore the biological underpinnings of creativity. Studies in this area typically employ tasks similar to those used in psychological assessments, asking participants to complete around 15 trials per condition. These experiments are carefully designed to probe how the brain supports creative thinking. Evidence suggests that creativity involves a balance between memory systems, which store existing knowledge, and control systems, which enable us to focus attention and resist the pull of conventional answers. Roger Beatty, an influential figure in this field, notes that creativity is generally accepted in neuroscience as the ability to generate ideas that are both new and useful. Tasks used in these studies might include finding connections between pairs of words, a process that taps into the organization of memory and the ability to maintain focus. This neuroscientific perspective has practical implications. In art education, for example, understanding the cognitive processes underlying creativity allows teachers to move beyond vague notions of innate talent. Instead, they can identify and nurture specific mental skills, helping students develop concrete abilities that support creative work. This shift from mystery to mechanism does not diminish the wonder of creativity. Rather, it opens up new avenues for cultivating it in individuals and groups. Despite these advances, challenges remain. Measuring creativity is inherently difficult because it spans so many domains: art, science, business, everyday life, and because it is shaped by both individual traits and social context. Some researchers highlight the need for a wider range of assessment methods, including tasks that reflect real-world problem-solving and collaborative innovation. Others emphasize the importance of studying creativity across cultures and throughout different stages of life. At its core, creativity is the capacity to develop original solutions, to brainstorm and experiment, to take risks and explore new approaches. It involves recognizing our own predispositions and deliberately stepping beyond them. The creative process is about more than flashes of inspiration. It is an ongoing engagement with ideas, problems, and the ever-shifting landscape of possibility. As science continues to unravel the mysteries of the creative mind, one thing is clear: creativity is not a rare gift bestowed on a select few. It is a fundamental aspect of human cognition, shaped by history, culture, and biology. Whether in the quiet of a laboratory, the bustle of a classroom, or the solitude of an artist's studio, the foundations of creativity rest on the remarkable ability of the mind to imagine, combine, and transform. In seeking to define and measure creativity, researchers illuminate not just how we create, but who we are. When we peer into the living brain in search of the roots of creativity, we do not find a single spark in one corner of the cortex. Instead, we encounter a complex web of circuits and connections, a rich tapestry of neural interplay. Neuroscience now defines creativity as the ability to generate ideas that are both original and relevant, a process that does not arise from any single creativity center. Rather, it emerges from the dynamic collaboration of several brain systems. The familiar image of a creative brain as a distinct faculty, perhaps a glowing right hemisphere ablaze with ideas, has given way to a subtler, more intricate understanding. Creativity is not housed in one region or even one network. It is distributed, multifaceted, and deeply embedded in the very architecture of our minds. At the heart of creative thought lies a conversation between two major brain networks, the default mode network and the executive control network. Though their names may sound technical, together they orchestrate much of what makes human imagination possible. The default mode network, or DMN, is activated when our minds wander, when we daydream, reminisce, or let our thoughts drift freely from one idea to the next. This network weaves together fragments of memory, emotion, and perception, allowing for the spontaneous generation of new ideas. Studies now describe the DMN as foundational for creative cognition. When neuroscientists have used direct cortical stimulation to inhibit the DMN, they found that people's ability to think divergently, to generate a variety of possible solutions or associations, was dampened. Individuals with more gray matter in DMN areas tend to perform better on creativity tasks, further underscoring this network's importance. But daydreams alone do not make an artist, a scientist, or an inventor. For an idea to become useful or meaningful, it must be shaped, evaluated, and sometimes discarded. Here, the Executive Control Network, or ECN, comes into play. This system, anchored in parts of the prefrontal cortex, is responsible for focus, planning, and self-monitoring. It acts as the mind's editor, filtering out distractions and honing in on what matters. Creative thinking, then, is not a battle between chaos and order, but a dance between these two brain networks, one generating raw material, the other applying discipline and judgment. The salience network, another key system, serves as a switchboard, helping determine when the brain should shift from spontaneous idea generation to focused evaluation, or vice versa. What happens in the brain when we engage in a creative act, when a poet searches for the perfect metaphor, or a musician improvises a melody? Meta-analyses of artistic creativity across diverse forms such as music, drawing, and literary composition reveal both domain-general and domain-specific patterns. Certain regions, like the pre-supplementary motor area, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and right inferior frontal gyrus, tend to be active regardless of the domain. Yet each art form also recruits its own specialized circuits, reflecting the particular demands of musical structure, visual processing, or linguistic expression. The prefrontal cortex stands out as a crucial player in these processes. It is deeply involved in decision-making, problem-solving, and the regulation of emotion. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC in particular, is implicated in creative cognition, especially in the coordination and flexible switching between internal musings and goal-directed thought. This region helps us move fluidly from generating ideas to scrutinizing them, a skill essential not only for artists, but for anyone seeking innovative solutions. Neural imaging studies show that both adolescents and adults rely on the prefrontal cortex during creative problem-solving, and experiments using transcranial direct current stimulation have demonstrated that priming the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex can enhance creative performance, especially after activities that encourage divergent thinking. Yet the prefrontal cortex does not work alone. Creativity also draws in the limbic system, which helps process emotion and memory, as well as the parietal and occipital lobes, which provide spatial orientation and visual imagery. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to experience, means that engaging in creative pursuits can actually strengthen and reshape these networks over time. Interestingly, the age-old idea that creativity is the exclusive domain of the right hemisphere has been challenged by brain imaging studies. For example, when jazz musicians improvise, novices tend to rely more on the right hemisphere, while experts call upon the left. This suggests that the division of creative labor between hemispheres is not fixed, but depends on experience and familiarity with the task. Creativity, it turns out, is a whole brain endeavor, drawing on both hemispheres and multiple neural pathways. Highly creative individuals show greater functional connectivity between the left inferior frontal gyrus and the default mode network, as well as between the right inferior frontal gyrus, bilateral inferior parietal cortex, and the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. These connections are not static, they shift and adapt depending on the demands of the moment. For instance, divergent thinking, generating many possible uses for an object, or finding new connections between ideas, depends on the interplay between the default mode and frontoparietal control networks. The strength of these connections can even be predicted by dopamine-related neurotransmitters, hinting at the neurochemical underpinnings of creative thought. Recent research has also highlighted the right frontal pole as a potential hub for creative tasks, serving as a central node that links otherwise distant brain regions. But the story does not end with a handful of cortical areas. Creative insight, the aha moment, appears to require the coupling of multiple large-scale networks, including the default mode, semantic, and cerebellar networks. This suggests that creative breakthroughs emerge not from a single flash of inspiration, but from the orchestrated activity of diverse systems working in concert. The process of creativity is further shaped by intact and healthy knowledge systems represented in several cortical pathways. Artistic and scientific innovation alike depend on a well-organized store of semantic concepts and associations. Flexibility, adaptability, and visualization, hallmarks of creative thinking, rely on both conscious and unconscious processes that span the brain's architecture. Two key brain states have been identified in relation to creative thinking. One involves whole brain synchronization, where regions across both hemispheres operate in harmony. The other is characterized by more modular, network-specific activity. The ability to shift between these states, to synchronize widely when imagining new possibilities and then focus narrowly when refining an idea, is at the core of creative cognition. It is increasingly clear that creativity is a dynamic, distributed process. Efforts to localize creativity to a single brain area or even a single network have largely fallen short. Instead, the evidence points to a model in which large-scale brain systems interact fluidly, with the default mode network generating ideas, the executive control network evaluating and shaping them, and the salience network mediating transitions between these states. The particular regions and connections involved can vary depending on the domain, whether musical, visual, or verbal, and on the individual's expertise and habits of mind. In sum, the neuroscience of creativity reveals a fascinating paradox. Imagination is wired, not to a single circuit or center, but to a constellation of interconnected networks, each contributing its own specialty. The brain's capacity for creativity arises from its ability to flexibly combine, reorganize, and synchronize these systems in service of novel and meaningful ideas. As research continues, the hope is that we will not only map these intricate pathways, but also discover how to nurture and enhance them, helping each mind realize its full creative potential. What sets the mind in motion toward creative breakthrough? At the heart of this question is the dance of neurochemicals, tiny messengers pulsing through intricate networks, shaping how we think, feel, and imagine. Creativity, far from being a mysterious spark from nowhere, emerges from the shifting tides of neurotransmitters and the subtle interplay of mood, motivation, and brain state. Scientists now know that the noradrenergic and dopaminergic systems are especially important here, serving as the chemical engines of creative thought, though they are not alone. The serotonergic system also exerts significant influence, weaving together emotion and cognition in ways that can both fuel and hinder the creative process. Consider what happens when we feel motivated or when our mood rises and falls. These everyday experiences are mediated by the brain's neuromodulatory systems, dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, all of which shape our capacity for creative cognition. Dopamine, often called the brain's reward chemical, plays a central role. When we are motivated to solve a problem or pursue a new idea, dopamine levels rise, nudging the mind into a more open, flexible state. Norepinephrine, meanwhile, is tied to alertness and the ability to focus, sharpening our attention as we tackle creative challenges. Serotonin, long associated with mood regulation, sets the emotional backdrop against which creative ideas emerge. Each of these systems contributes in its own way, and fluctuations in their activity can push the brain toward either creative insight or a creative block. Mood and motivation, then, are not mere extras in the creative story, they are central characters. Both positive and negative emotions can drive us to create, though research suggests that positive emotions have a stronger overall impact on motivation. When spirits are high, the mind becomes more willing to venture into the unknown, to make unusual connections, and to persist through uncertainty. Yet negative emotions should not be discounted. Recent studies indicate that while positive moods tend to broaden ideation, encouraging the exploration of new possibilities, negative emotions can sometimes sharpen execution and foster focus. Someone grappling with frustration or sadness may find themselves less distracted, more intent on working through a problem to its conclusion. In this light, the relationship between affect and creativity is not a simple one-way street, but a complex intersection where different moods channel creative energy in distinct directions. What seems to matter even more than whether a mood is positive or negative is the intensity of motivation it produces. High motivational intensity, whether it springs from excitement or anxiety, tends to narrow attentional focus, channeling energy toward goal completion. In contrast, low motivational states, those moments when we feel relaxed, curious, or only mildly interested, open the mind to a wider range of possibilities. This may help explain why daydreaming or idle play, often accompanied by gentle curiosity rather than strong drive, can be fertile ground for new ideas. The mind, less tethered to a specific outcome, is free to wander, recombine, and experiment. The story grows more intricate when we consider the impact of mental health states such as depression. Depression diminishes motivation and alters brain function, making it harder to muster the energy for creative work. Yet engaging in creative activities can break this cycle of inactivity, boosting mood and jump-starting motivation. It is not uncommon for those in depressive states to find solace and even renewed energy through art, music, or writing. The very acts that depression makes difficult to begin often become pathways out of stagnation. These nuances become especially vivid when the brain is under stress. The noradrenergic and dopaminergic systems, so crucial for creativity, are exquisitely sensitive to stress levels. Acute stress, as experiments show, generally impairs creative performance. The mind, flooded with stress hormones, narrows its focus, prioritizing immediate survival over imaginative exploration. Electroencephalogram and electrocardiogram studies reveal that stress alters the brain's electrical activity and shifts the regions recruited for creative problem-solving, often with detrimental effects. Importantly, it is not only the objective level of stress that matters, but how that stress is perceived. If a person feels overwhelmed or threatened, their sense of well-being drops, which in turn predicts lower creative output. Depression can deepen this effect, acting as a moderator that makes the creative cost of stress even steeper. Yet the relationship between stress and creativity is not entirely bleak. In some cases, manageable levels of stress can sharpen attention and drive, particularly when paired with clear motivation. Still, too much stress, or the wrong kind, tends to stifle the very processes that allow new ideas to surface and flourish. The two major neural systems underpinning creativity, the default network, which generates novel concepts, and the executive control network, which shapes and evaluates those concepts, are both vulnerable to the effects of stress. When stress overloads these systems, the delicate balance required for creative thinking is disrupted, and the mind's capacity for insight diminishes. On the flip side, the experience of creative insight itself, those sudden aha moments, triggers a burst of activity in the brain's reward system. This surge acts as its own motivator, making creative breakthroughs not only satisfying but self-reinforcing. With each insight, the brain's reward pathways are activated, encouraging us to seek out new challenges and return to the creative process again and again. These moments are detectable in the brain. Electroencephalogram and functional magnetic resonance imaging studies show that insight is associated with high-frequency oscillations in the right superior temporal gyrus, and just before an insight strikes, there is a brief suppression of activity in the visual cortex. It is as if the brain temporarily quiets outside distractions, clearing the way for a novel connection to emerge. Sleep, long regarded as a passive state, has now been revealed as an active player in the creative process. The transition into sleep, the N1 stage, or hypnagogia, represents a creative sweet spot where the mind is uniquely primed for associative thinking. During this liminal state, the brain becomes more adept at drawing novel connections, leading to greater creative performance. Experiments with targeted dream incubation, where individuals are prompted to dream about a specific topic as they drift into sleep, show that this technique can enhance creativity on related tasks. Simply prompting dreams during sleep onset can increase the likelihood of creative solutions, suggesting that the edge of sleep is a fertile ground for innovation. The role of sleep does not end there. Short naps, particularly those that reach the N2 stage, have been shown to significantly boost problem-solving abilities and the frequency of aha experiences. Electroencephalogram data confirm that these brief periods of rest facilitate the neural dynamics required for insight. The effects of sleep deprivation on creativity, however, are mixed. Some studies indicate that lack of sleep impairs creative performance, while others suggest a paradoxical enhancement, at least in the short term. It appears that the relationship between sleep, rest, and creativity is complex, shaped by the type of task, the individual's baseline state, and the unique neural rhythms of each person. Taken together, these findings paint a picture of creativity as a state of mind, one sculpted by the ebb and flow of neurotransmitters, the rise and fall of mood, the intensity of motivation, and the ever-present influence of emotion and stress. If creativity is a dance, its rhythm is set by dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, its tempo shaped by well-being and drive. The brain's networks, so expertly tuned for both exploration and control, are at their most inventive when stress is manageable, motivation is balanced, and rest is plentiful. Even in the face of adversity, whether sadness, stress, or exhaustion, the creative impulse finds ways to endure, adapt, and sometimes even flourish. In these moments, we glimpse the remarkable resilience and flexibility of the creative mind, forever seeking new connections, new solutions, and new ways to see the world. If you were to walk into a room humming with creative energy, what would you see? Perhaps a sunlit studio scattered with art supplies, a group of students tinkering with robotics, or a pair of colleagues sketching ideas on a glass wall. What you might not notice but is just as important are the subtle forces, biological, cognitive, and environmental, that cultivate and sustain creative thought. Neuroscience has begun to illuminate these hidden workings, not only revealing what happens in the brain during creative moments, but also offering practical strategies to enhance our own creative potential. One of the most striking findings from recent research is that creativity is not a fixed trait, nor a mysterious gift bestowed on a lucky few. Instead, it is a dynamic process, one that can be nurtured and developed throughout life. Scientists studying creativity in the brain have identified mechanisms that can be influenced through deliberate habits, daily routines, and changes in our surroundings. This knowledge opens the door to evidence-based techniques for boosting creativity in education, the workplace, and beyond. Let us begin with the brain itself. The neural machinery of creativity is malleable, responsive to training, stimulation, and experience. For example, cognitive training exercises, sometimes delivered as brain training games, have been shown to enhance foundational functions like attention, memory, and executive control. These are not just abstract improvements, they directly support the flexible thinking and inventive problem-solving that creativity requires. Regular engagement with such activities, whether through structured games or creative outlets like art, music, and writing, appears to strengthen cognitive function and foster creative growth. Scientists have even observed that certain types of cognitive training can increase levels of acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter closely tied to attention and memory. What is particularly intriguing is that this kind of training may help reverse age-related cognitive decline, suggesting that the brain's creative potential can be revitalized, not just preserved. But training the mind is only part of the story. Where we create matters too. A growing body of evidence points to the remarkable power of our environment to shape creative performance. Exposure to natural environments, for example, has been found to restore attention and enhance creativity. Whether walking through a forest, gazing at a part from an office window, or even viewing images of nature, individuals tend to experience improvements in focus, cognitive flexibility, and creative output. The degree of naturalness counts. Both high and medium naturalness environments improve creative performance, but the effect is strongest in settings rich with natural stimuli. In laboratory studies, participants exposed to nature showed measurable changes in brain activity, including shifts in electroencephalogram patterns that correlate with increased cognitive flexibility and imaginative thinking. These effects are not merely subjective, they can be observed in the uniqueness and diversity of creative ideas generated after such exposure. The mechanisms behind these benefits are multifaceted. One key factor is attention restoration. Natural environments seem to replenish the mental resources depleted by prolonged focus or cognitive effort, allowing for a kind of mental reset. This restoration goes hand in hand with heightened curiosity and flexibility, qualities at the heart of creative thinking. In fact, simply viewing natural scenes has been shown to stimulate curiosity and imagination, leading to more original and varied ideas. These findings suggest that creativity is not just a product of internal brain states, but is profoundly shaped by the external world we inhabit. Designing workplaces and educational settings with creativity in mind takes this insight further. Some researchers propose that the most effective spaces function as cognitive emotional ecosystems, deliberately structured to modulate neural and emotional states associated with creative work. These might include flexible seating, access to nature or natural light, and areas that support both solitary focus and collaborative brainstorming. The aim is to create an environment that balances stimulation and calm, supporting both the divergent and convergent phases of creative thought. Of course, cultivating creativity is not simply a matter of tweaking one's surroundings or playing brain games. It requires an understanding of the cognitive processes that underpin creative problem solving. Teaching these concepts explicitly, what flexibility looks like, how persistence operates, how to balance novelty with usefulness, can enhance creative performance. Neuroscience-based approaches to creativity training encourage learners to experiment with different strategies, reflect on their own thinking, and develop habits that support creative persistence. By integrating these principles into educational practice, teachers can help students move beyond rote learning toward genuine creative problem solving. This is not a solitary endeavor. Creativity, after all, flourishes in social and cultural contexts. Strategies for fostering creativity must bridge individual mechanisms with group dynamics and the broader cultural environment. For instance, collaborative activities that encourage the sharing and reshaping of ideas can amplify the creative capacities of groups, just as supportive cultures can nurture the persistence and risk-taking required for innovation. Creative thinking, at its best, is characterized by a dance between novelty and usefulness, persistence and flexibility, divergence and convergence. Recognizing and reinforcing these patterns at the group and organizational level is as crucial as nurturing them within individuals. The practical implications of neuroscience are being felt in educational and training settings, where brain science literacy, an understanding of how the brain creates, adapts, and learns, has been shown to boost creative thinking. When integrated into teaching strategies, and especially in early childhood interventions, this literacy promotes neural plasticity, the brain's lifelong capacity for change and growth. Children exposed to these ideas early tend to develop stronger creative thinking skills, as their brains are primed to adapt, reorganize, and make novel connections. This approach is not limited to the classroom. It can be applied in any context where creative thinking is valued. Institutions are beginning to recognize the far-reaching impact of creativity research. The Society for the Neuroscience of Creativity, for example, seeks to foster communication and collaboration in understanding the neural and cognitive foundations of creativity. Their work highlights the relevance of creativity not only for education and the arts, but for health and technological innovation as well. As creativity research matures, its influence is expanding into areas such as design processes, cognitive behavior, and social interaction. New methods for measuring creativity are being developed, reflecting the increasing sophistication of both cognitive neuroscience and applied psychology. What does the future hold for the science of creativity? As research delves deeper into the design of creative processes, the role of social exchange, and the neural underpinnings of creative behavior, we can expect ever more refined strategies for cultivating creative potential. The goal is not simply to produce more creative individuals, but to design environments, systems, and cultures where creativity thrives, where originality and usefulness are celebrated, where persistence is balanced by flexibility, and where the seeds of new ideas can take root. The science is clear. Creativity can be cultivated. By understanding how creative thought arises in the brain, adopting evidence-based techniques to train our minds and shape our environments, and embracing a culture that values both novelty and usefulness, we can all enhance our creative potential. The journey from insight to innovation is not reserved for the rare genius. It is a path open to anyone willing to explore, adapt, and grow. As neuroscience continues to reveal the secrets of the creative mind, the possibilities for human ingenuity may be greater than we ever imagined.